Hello, everybody. Chris Teal here, director of the second annual Fayetteville Jazz Festival. Just popping in right before the next workshop, just to give a reminder. Check down in the description of this video. There are lots of opportunities to help out not only this festival through donations, but also get yourself involved playing music and also supporting scholarships for our Institute for Creative Music virtual summer camp that is still happening. We're going to do this with a combination of pre-recorded videos that the IfCM has been doing for quite a while, but new content, of course, for the summer campers at a variety of different levels, and a lot of live interactive workshops, kind of in lieu of doing jazz combos. We're going to have sectionals, all kinds of stuff. And so check out the description of all the things that are going on as we go forward after you enjoy all of these videos from the Fayetteville Jazz Festival. Coming up next, all the way from Bentonville, Arkansas, we're excited to have him living down here in the area after he spent quite a bit of time up in Chicago, Illinois. Please enjoy a fantastic performance and workshop from pianist Matt Nelson.
Hey everyone, my name is Matt Nelson. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. And thank you to the University of Arkansas and Mr. Chris Teal for asking me to put on this little workshop here and for being a part of the festival this year. It's a very strange year. Also want to say thank you to the First United Methodist Church in Bentonville, Arkansas. That's where I am right now in their sanctuary. If you happen to hear folks speaking in the background, volunteer workers for the food pantry here, doing the incredible work that they're doing right now during this crazy time. I love the acoustics in this room. I like the natural reverb here, especially for small group performances, solo performances. It sounds really good. I have two amazing kids at home, and while I'd rather be at home playing my own Kawai piano, this is a Kawai as well. But a pretty small house. I don't really have the luxury of having a separate music area at the time. So here we are. I'm very grateful for this space. So thank you, FUMC. I hope you all are staying safe and healthy during this time. If you're a giggy musician like me, you've probably seen most, if not all, of your paid performance opportunities dry up and drop away. We've all had to shift. The model that we're using right now as musicians, and it's hard. So much love to all of you watching right now. We are all going to get through this. That tune you just heard me play on Green Dolphin Street, it's a well-known jazz standard that I've loved playing for a long time. I think it was actually one of the first standards I ever learned. It was a completely impromptu version. It was through improvised from the beginning. It was my arrangement in that moment, and I'm never going to play it the same way again. One of the reasons I chose to play it is because it's a tune that often seems to come with a lot of built-in musical baggage. What do I mean by musical baggage? I mean that there are conventions, ways of playing the tune that are often understood or expected in a performance setting. And I wanted to challenge a few of those conventions. I enjoy challenging them when I have a chance, especially when I'm playing by myself. I believe that doing so keeps the music fresh and alive and exciting to both play as a musician and also to listen to as an audience member. One of the familiar customs in this tune that I noticed a long time ago is to play the first 8 bars of the song with a Latin feel and the next 8 bars with a swing feel, and you alternate throughout the entire tune. Just about any time I've been on a jazz gig with new musicians I haven't gotten the chance to really talk with or get to know yet, we're still feeling each other out musically. Unless we discuss how the tune's going to go in advance, that Latin swing Latin thing just happens. Why? One reason is that I suspect it has a lot to do with the real book, the famous real book saying, that's how it goes. And also I think the notion that we all likely learned to play this tune in our formative days as musicians. Maybe we were students. We learned to play this tune by looking it up in the real book. We learned the changes in the melody from what was written in that real book. And there's many conventions, I think, in jazz music and the way that we tend to play it that have come from the real book. Written print saying that the music goes one way. Without us necessarily checking out any other recordings, ways that other musicians have played the tune. I think, printed music in jazz is an important tool, but it's only meant to provide a guideline. It's like a framework for how the music should be played. The original real book is full of a lot of weird chord changes and incorrect melodies and things like that. For a real reference point, I think for any tune that you want to learn how to play, I think a good starting point is to listen to how a masterful musician has played it. Search for the tune on Spotify or YouTube, and listen to several different versions that have been put out there. Find one that speaks to you and feels good to you. That's really important. It's got to feel good to you. And listen to it, absorb it. And then when you're ready to really make the music come alive, you can take those elements that you hear and you can use them as a springboard to really make the tune your own. A little bit about myself. I live in Bentonville, Arkansas with my family. I am a full-time giggy musician. I have been for about 18 years now. Prior to moving here about 3 years ago with my family, I was a full-time working gigging musician in Chicago. Lived and played there, and for about 15 years, and I loved it. And I played all kinds of music. I still play all kinds of music. All different styles, everything from R&B, jazz, funk, gospel, all different kinds of rock. I've played in indie rock bands. I've played in metal bands. I've done hip hop. To me, good music is good music. It doesn't matter what the style is. But I will say that everything that I have played along the way has been informed by jazz. As a language, the language of jazz music has found its way into all the different music I play. And I've learned quite a bit from studying jazz. And that's one of the reasons I'm talking about jazz specifically today. I don't feel personally that it is a superior form of music to anything else. I just think it is a tradition and a language that if you learn the language, it can really serve any kind of music you look to play. And that jazz doesn't necessarily have to be the music we're familiar with in the tradition that we're used to playing in. Jazz could be a lot of different things. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about the real book, the origin of the real book. The real book was a collection of lead sheets for jazz standards and tunes that were being played at the time by jazz students at Berklee College of Music in the early 1970s. It was written by students at that time. It is a very useful tool. It's still being used today, obviously. It provides a common repertoire for musicians that have never played together before, making frequent gigging possible, which is a great thing. I don't know how many times when I was gigging in Chicago, especially when I'd show up on a gig, and there would be one or more musicians that I've never played with there. During those gigs, jazz's musical conventions served us very well because they provided a solid framework in which to make improvised music together and have it sound pretty decent most of the time. And on many types of gigs, the goal is not to explore new musical territory or try something out or try to do something that's never been done before, but it's simply to perform professional sounding music. Jazz's conventions and the framework that you see in a place like the Real Book, I think serve musicians really well in those settings. And having a real book with me or an app on my phone in more recent years has definitely saved me when somebody's called a tune and I'm the only musician that doesn't know the changes in the room. But I believe that the more musicians rely on written music, that more musicians rely on the page to learn the language of jazz, the more stale and stuck the art form becomes. Jazz is best understood by listening, immersing, and conversing. It's a language. It's a language. You can learn the fundamentals of a new language by reading books and taking classes, and even by practicing the language's sounds and vocabulary. But it's nearly impossible to become fluent, I think, unless you immerse yourself in that new language. For a lot of years, I played in a rock band that started in Chicago, but eventually became based in Poland. So I would travel to Poland frequently to perform and record there. Krakow's gorgeous, by the way. If you've never been, I highly recommend visiting if you get the chance. Anyway, every time I would travel to Poland, I'd arrive armed with a language guidebook and a pronunciation guide. And I'd always feel like I'd picked up just enough Polish phrases to get me where I needed to go, to order food, to buy a tram ticket, to ask for the most basic of directions. One time I traveled there, though, and I ended up staying for close to 3 weeks. And my friend who I was staying with, one of the few people that I knew there that spoke English, he had to work a lot at the time. So I mostly found myself on my own on that trip, wandering around the city and forced to immerse myself in the Polish language. And just do the thing. I had to just do the darn thing. I had to try to pronounce words that I didn't feel comfortable with. I had to take a chance on embarrassing myself. And most importantly, when I engaged with somebody, I really had to listen and try to comprehend what was being spoken back to me, even if I didn't quite understand or if the sounds weren't familiar to me. And by the time I was ready to go home after the 3-week trip, my ears were so finely tuned to the sound and rhythm of Polish that I understood a lot of what I heard around me, what people were saying to me. The language didn't sound foreign anymore. And immersed myself in it. It started to become a part of me. Now, if you ask me to speak Polish, I can't even speak it right now. Przepraszam bardzo. I'm very sorry. But yeah, music is like this. It's a language. The very best thing you can do if you're learning to play jazz is to listen to it and then speak it yourself. If you're a music student, listen to others play the music you'd like to learn to play, whether it's recorded or whether it's live, and then create some opportunities to play the music with others. Even if you don't feel ready, just do it. Get out there and play. If gigging's not a possibility, then get together with other musicians and just play together. Try things out, make mistakes, and then learn from them. Just like any living language, jazz has a rich and deep history that has a lot to teach us. But I believe its conventions must be challenged if the language is to evolve and thrive. And when it comes to actually playing music, these challenges to the conventions don't have to be big things. Instead of playing on Dolphin Street with the Latin swing Latin thing, what if you just swing it? Try it as an R&B thing, you know? Don't feel bad about leaving space. See, make it feel good. That's the idea. You don't have to play a tune any specific way. I'll repeat that. You do not have to play a tune in a specific way just because somebody else has done it or because the instructions in a fake book say to do it. You can make it yours. And when you do, the music comes alive. Let's play another tune. So that tune that I just played is called Joy Spring. It was written by trumpeter Clifford Brown in the 1950s. And the tempo and the feel on the original recording of that tune, it was like this bouncy swing. I chose to slow it down and make it bluesier because right now it felt right. Another day, something else might feel right, and that's okay. Something I'd like to point out is that in a tune like this, with a lot of 2/5 changes in it, the temptation or the tendency is often to improvise in this linear bebop sort of way of lots of eighth notes. While the harmony continues to move underneath, however, you can take a simpler approach. You can take an approach that's more melodic. You can find a few common tones and make a simple new melody, for example, you know. It doesn't need to be complicated. You don't need to outline each new chord with a matching lick or a change in direction. And you don't need to run up and down altered scales to sound proficient. You don't even need to solo at a bebop style when you're playing a Charlie Parker tune. You're not Charlie Parker, and neither am I. You can pay tribute to someone's composition or musical mastery without trying to imitate their musical approach. Imitation is a very important way to learn a language, and a very important way to learn music, but it's not the ultimate goal, right? The ultimate goal is to sound like you. So that tune I just played, I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It's called "Girl from Ipanema," written by Antonio Carlos Jobim. In the 1960s, it was sort of spearheaded the bossa nova movement, I guess, at that time. And it's often one of the first bossa nova tunes that jazz musicians learn, or jazz students learn when they're learning to play jazz. And it found its way into the original real book. It's still in there today. It's this tune that a lot of jazz musicians are very familiar with. A few things that I did when I was playing this tune, and a few things that sort of jump out at me if I'm looking at, especially that original real book version of this tune, is that, like, in the first phrase of the tune, in the A section, you got the chords go F major 7, G7, G minor 7, and then you have this G flat 7. But to me, that G flat 7 chord, while not incorrect, what is an incorrect chord anyway? It just sounds weird and clashy to my ears, and it doesn't even clash. The melody is the 7 of that chord. But so what musical function is that chord serving? Well, if you take a closer look at it, it's pretty easy to see that is it's functioning as the 5. It's the tritone sub. Instead of playing the C chord, there's a G flat chord. It's not incorrect. It makes theoretical sense. But what if instead of playing that G flat 7 chord, you try something different? Simplify a little bit. Try a 2-5. C7, or just hang out on the C. To me, that just opens up. I prefer hearing smoother. To me, it's a bit more artful. If you prefer the first chord, by all means do it. Play it. It's not wrong. It makes sense. You do you. But I like changing that up whenever I get the opportunity. Another thing I guess I want to point out, sort of random things, in the bridge of this tune, during the turnaround of the bridge, the end of the bridge, listen to the melody. On the sharp 11 of each of those chords. D7 chord, it's a G sharp is the melody, so it's the sharp 11. And that's a C7 chord with an F sharp in the melody, making a C7 sharp 11. So I like, especially when I'm taking a solo on the tune, I like playing with those sharp 11s. The melody is important. The melody is what the tune is all about. And I'm not directing this at anybody in particular. I'm guilty of it too. Of sometimes, there's this tendency sometimes to rush through the head of a tune and the melody of a tune to get to the middle of it, so that you can take your solo when you're playing jazz. But the melody matters. The melody informs everything that the tune is all about. Throughout the history of jazz, the music's common repertoire has consisted of one of two types of music, I think. One is original compositions written by the musicians who perform it. The other is popular music. In the 1920s through the 1940s and even a bit into the 50s before rock and roll took over, jazz was popular music. Many of the jazz standards that we play today, if it wasn't written by a well-known jazz musician or a composer, these tunes that we play and we know as jazz standards, They were pop music at some point in time. Pop music, right? We're taking the melody in the framework of a pop tune and then improvising over its chord changes. And I'd argue that most of the old tunes that we're playing in a jazz setting date back to the 1960s and before, and most of them are beautiful tunes. But they reflect musical conventions that in the year 2020 come from another era. So to the ears of non-musicians, at least, I think it's no wonder that jazz is currently such a misunderstood and overlooked art form. It often sounds like something inaccessible or something from another era. It doesn't sound like something current and fresh. Of course, there's exceptions to that. Take somebody like Robert Glasper, for example, who's playing. I love what he's doing with jazz. It makes the music sound like now, and it breathes new life into it. Again, I think paying tribute to the history of jazz music and any kind of music is incredibly important. And finding the music's roots are incredibly important. But music is language, and to keep any language vibrant and alive, I think we need to continue to incorporate new vocabulary and move beyond the conventions of the past. It's not to do away with the conventions of the past, but I think we can continue to incorporate new vocabulary into those conventions of the past and really make the music richer and more alive for everybody. The real book was written in the early 1970s by students based on music that they were playing at that time. That was 50 years ago. 50 years ago. What would be in that book if it was written by students in 2020? Why are we not expanding the repertoire deeper? Why are we not bringing it into now? What if I were to call a tune from the 80s on a gig? Or something from the 2010s. jazz, I'm improvising within the context of a musical framework. Pop music from the 80s doesn't have the same musical conventions as pop music from the 40s. It sounds different. Most pop music from the 80s doesn't swing, at least not in the way that we typically think of when we think of jazz. If it does swing, it tends to be more of a shuffle. Boom, 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 boom. Like Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears. First thing that popped into my head. It has like a 6/8 or 12/8 shuffle underneath it. It doesn't swing in the same way as big band music from the 30s does, or the 40s. The harmony tends to be more diatonic, more based in one key. There's less 2-5-1s, and there's more triads, and the bass pedal lines and the triads. In the last few decades especially, music tends to be more repetitive. A lot of times it's based on a hook that repeats over and over and over again. Waterfalls by TLC has 4 chords that repeat over and over again. That was from the 90s. These things don't make the music inferior to music from a more traditional era, and I think that's incredibly important. It's incredibly important to note. Simpler doesn't mean dumber. It's simply a different set of conventions from a different era. And the conventions are ever changing. If you lament the idea that good music was only made decades ago and that everything coming out nowadays is garbage, you're either not paying attention or maybe you're just not interested in checking out new music. And if that's the case, that's just fine. New music doesn't just mean what you hear on the radio. I think jazz will only live as long as musicians have an audience to play for. And playing only tunes where only old-timers can recognize the melody, I think that approach has a limited lifespan, and it's getting shorter and shorter. What if, on a jazz gig in front of an audience, we were to play all music from the 1970s up through now? I suspect that we'd catch the ears of many more folks that may have disregarded jazz as music of the past. Playing a familiar melody goes a long, long way to draw in a listening audience. It's huge. It's so important, I'm going to repeat that again. Playing a familiar melody goes a long, long way to draw in a listening audience. Way farther than a technically impressive solo will ever do. In fact, I'd still rather hear a band playing a tune that I like in a sensitive and artful way, with no soloing whatsoever, than a band that rushes through the head to get to the solos. All of the music deserves respect. I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and play one more tune for you. fire. Anyway, thank you all so much again for tuning in today. It's been such a joy being with you, and I really look forward to next time. Thanks a lot.